Many years ago, I tried to bake a lemon meringue pie. I wanted to make this pie not only because it's my favorite pie, but because some friends of mine had invited me for dinner, and it was my job to bring the dessert. So I went to the grocery store and bought all of the key ingredients, and then went back home and followed the recipe just as I had found it. And although I encountered a few obstacles in my baking, I was confident that I had indeed successfully baked a lemon meringue pie. You could probably tell where this story is headed. I proceeded to dinner along with my then girlfriend, Kristen. And after dinner, we took the pie out of the fridge, where it was to have firmed up and congealed, as lemon meringue pies are wont to do. But when we went to cut and serve it, we had quite a hard time because the pie was extremely runny, having remained in liquid form. We did our best and drizzled the pie soup out onto individual plates. And as we began to eat it, there was a sense that something else was not quite right. It tasted lemony, to be sure, but it had a distinctly grainy, a bready kind of texture to it. And then at that moment, a question popped into my mind, which I decided to pose to the group. Is there any difference between cornmeal and cornstarch? Turns out that there is. And quite a significant one, actually, because cornstarch will help you make a real lemon meringue pie, whereas cornmeal will only help you get embarrassed in front of your friends. Lesson learned. Cornmeal is not the same thing as cornstarch. Ultimately, the pie fiasco was the comic relief, adding to our experience of sharing a meal with one another. It gave us a memory to add to our story. Food has a way of doing that, of cementing our relationships with one another, whether we're sharing a meal with a spouse or a friend, or making food for those who are hungry. Food is never just food. Food is always a gift, and it has been ever since there were human beings to eat and to give it. The very first gift that God gave to human beings was food. In the book of Genesis, after creating the first humans, God blesses them and gives them the fruit of all the plants and the trees of the earth as their food. Many years later, when the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness after the Lord had raised them up from Egypt, God gave them bread from heaven so that they would not starve on their journey to the promised land. And then, long after that, when our Lord Jesus Christ walked upon the earth, he took 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes and gave it to the thousands who had followed him. And everyone ate as much as they wanted. But those loaves and fishes weren't enough. And when the hungry crowds came to Jesus again, he stood before them and declared, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." In these words, Jesus reminds us that we are hungry creatures, always seeking to be satisfied, but never really being satisfied. We eat and we eat, but we will always be hungry. We will always be thirsty. And while this is a simple observation, we shouldn't miss the deeper truth. We are beings who eat and desire and consume, though are never able to really sink our teeth into something that will finally quench our desires. But like the Israelites in the wilderness, all we can find is just manna, satisfying enough for a moment, until it turns to ashes in our mouths. It's too easy to fill ourselves on the bread that dies until we have finally found the bread that lives. Food is never just food. In a few moments, we will be invited to approach the altar where we will commune with the bread of life, who has come down from heaven and gives life to the world. In the Eucharist, we discover that Jesus is our companion, who communes with us, seeks to be so close to us that there is no longer a boundary between our bodies and his body, the body of Christ. That's what communion means, when we abide in him and he abides in us. In the Eucharist, we discover that Jesus is not only our companion when we keep the feast, but that he himself is the feast. Our Lord invites us to his table so that we may eat of his bread, so that we no longer hunger or thirst. Jesus invites us to receive his body, his life into our lives, so that we might become part of his body, so that we might have his life to the full, so that our hungry souls may once and for all be satisfied in him. Will we receive the gift of himself that he offers us? Will we taste and see that the Lord is good? Let us then eat his flesh and drink his blood, and be made one body in him, that he may dwell in us, and we in him.